So I'm recording the session, and I'll just take the time now to say that the presentation materials are out here on the wiki, and the recording link to the replay will be out here on the wiki as well. This will probably take me either later today or tomorrow to get it up there. So welcome everyone. This is Joe Armstrong and the second July Power Systems Virtual User Group webinar. As I said, this is the second one this month. Last week we did Tricks of the Power Masters with Gareth Coates. Today we have a bonus session, IBMI related, so this IBMI specific session. Before we get into that, I just have a couple of little announcements. As usual, I like to plug the IBM Technical University, and you'll see it right here on the wiki site. I have a link to the IBM TechU. It's October 7th to 11th in Las Vegas. Best conference IBM puts on by far for technical people, and hundreds of sessions over the 5 days or 4.5 days, whatever it is, and just some great sessions with great presenters. I have a promotion code, the TUVUG here, gets you a discount. This is, I think, the super early bird discount, which is passed, but my code does not expire, so you can get this discount. So feel free to use this code to register. And when you're registering, if you're not having some other IBMer, please put my name down as the rep that told you about the conference. That way maybe I get to go too. So if you go, let me know, and maybe we can hook up and I at least have some stickers, if not maybe some T-shirts by then, if I can reload my T-shirt stock. So IBM TechU. The other thing I want to talk about is in August 28th, we have a Chicagoland Technology Day. And now I know the audience here is pretty broad, but anybody that's in the Chicago area, there's a Chicagoland Technology Day. They do this every year. Here's a link to the flyer on the wiki. There's no charge for this. It's a great way to get a few sessions as well. In fact, this right here is what's going to be, they're going to go over. Here's the topics that they've got lined up. An IBMI update. I don't know, Steve, are you going to that or is somebody else doing that?
That's not me. That's not me, no.
All right, somebody else is doing that IBMI update. So anyway, great stuff there. So with that, let's get to today's. And today we've got IBMI 7.4 with Steve Will. So Steve is the chief architect for the IBMI operating system. He's done this since 2007, so Steve's been in it a long time. Steve is an icon in the Rochester site. He's an icon in IBMI in general. So I'm going to build you up here, Steve.
Thanks.
So he's been working on IBMI since before the AS400. So as part of the whole creation of the AS400, which as you know is the first IBM system, that's what it was called. Actually, I started with IBM the year after the AS400 came out, and I think they had just celebrated the first year anniversary when I walked onto the site in Rochester. So Steve is responsible for setting the strategy of the IBMI operating system. He's responsible for deciding which enhancements are implemented. Steve is an award-winning speaker, one of the most popular, he runs one of the most popular IBMI blogs called You and I can put a link to that on the wiki. I don't have it there yet. And just a great speaker and travels the world talking about IBMI. So with that, Steve, let me see here. I need to make you, I'll stop sharing. I'll make you the presenter, and you can share. Go ahead and share now.
All right.
So while Steve's setting that up, IBMI 7.4 just released recently, and all kinds of cool stuff that Steve's going to tell us about here. So I can see your screen there, Steve, so take it away.
All right, thanks. As Joe mentioned in my introduction, I'm the chief architect, and one of the things that means is that I get to spend time after we do a release talking in a lot of different venues about the things that the team has done. The team that develops IBMI, the majority of us sit here in Rochester, Minnesota. We have a large development, part of our development team in Beijing, China. I have folks who are basically all around the world. Folks in Canada do our compilers and so on and so forth. So this is a large team effort, but I get a chance to talk to people about it. So let's get started. Those of you who have heard me speak before ever will recognize this format of roadmap. We put out a roadmap every time we do a new major release, with the new major release right up front and in the center. So this year, in April, we announced 7.4. In June, it became generally available. At the same time as we put out our major releases, we also put out the technology refresh for the release before. Any of you who's been part of the community for a while know we every 6 months or so put out a new technology refresh for the releases that are in under support at the time with major new function in it. So 7.4 came out and 7.3 technology refresh 6 was also announced at the same time. I mention this in particular for the 7.4 presentation because our strategy now is to put out new function in technology refreshes and in the major releases as much as we can. And so for many of the things that I talk about in this presentation, particularly later in the presentation, not only are those enhancements in 7.4, but they are also made available on 7.3. A very, very few of them are made available on 7.2, but basically once 7.4 came out, 7.2 went into sort of stability mode. It's still supported. You can still get fixes for it, but we don't enhance the release that's 2 releases old. We enhance the release that's current, that's 7.4, and the release before that, that's 7.3. But there are several major things, and those are the things I'll talk about early in the presentation, which are only in 7.4. There are always new enhancements with every major release, which are too pervasive. They affect too much of the operating system to be put out in technology refreshes, and those tend to be the highlight features of any given release. So we'll talk about that. But another thing to recognize from this is that because we've been putting out technology refreshes and major releases, and because it's so easy to move from one release to another release, skipping the release between them, some of the things I'll talk about in 7.4 were actually built on top of things that we've delivered in prior releases and technology refreshes. Now, if I were in an audience where I could see all of you, I would ask you to raise your hands for which releases you're actually using in production, but I can just tell you that most of the people that I talk to are either using 7.3 or 7.2, but there are still some folks on 7.1 because it's an extended support, and some clients have trouble moving very quickly. So there are a lot of things that you need to remember are the basis of 7.4, and we build on top of them with the 7.4 release. So a lot of the integrated analytics that we did in 7.2 and 7.3 are assumed. They're part of what you can do on this platform now, where you do not have to move data off to some other platform to do analytics. You can do it integrated right within IBM's DB2 operations. You can do modernization of your applications using RPG, which is what most of our clients have done for many, many years, but you've got lots of open options, and that started long before 7.4 came out, but I will be talking about some of the newest open stuff that we announced with 7.4. Managing the platform now is no longer a green screen thing or even a screen-scraped green screen thing, and that, again, started before 7.4, but we'll talk about some of the highlights of the enhancements that were announced in 7.4. And then there's all sorts of capabilities related to virtualization, and we'll touch on that briefly before we're done as well. So now let's get to what the Cornerstone announcements were for the 7.4 release. Again, based on those things that existed before, but now unique for what we have recently delivered. There are these 4 major categories. There is continuous availability, and I'm going to talk about this longest in this presentation, something called IBM DB2 Mirror for I, that's now available for IBM I clients. But there is a significant set of new security enhancements that have been made. As all of you are aware who are IBM I clients, security is part of our architecture, and we incorporate new security management and auditing capabilities basically every release to make it easy for people to prove to auditors that you have secured your system properly, and that certainly is the case with 7.4's new features. Application development is the key thing on our platform, whether it's DB2, RPG, COBOL, open source stuff. Whatever is going on this platform is going on because people want to run applications that run their businesses, but they want to use the latest technology, and so there are advancements there. Then how you access and manage the platform, as I briefly mentioned earlier, has been changing over time. And while some people are still tied to green interfaces, most of the powerful things you can do with this platform are now done using Access Client Solutions and services, and we'll talk about those. Then, because we have a whole hour to talk about this, I will talk about some of the things that aren't necessarily cornerstones, but which may in fact be just the thing that you've been waiting for. We get hundreds of requirements submitted to us through our advisory councils, our user groups, and the requests for enhancements that can come in from any client, and we have implemented many of them. I can't cover them all here, but I will do as much as I can overviewing them, and then you can go to the details that are on our DeveloperWorks site, our announcement pages, and our Knowledge Center. All right, so let's start with the first of the cornerstone items, continuous availability, IBM's DB2 Mirror for I. Last year was the 30th anniversary of the platform. AS400 was released in 1988, so in 2018 we celebrated. And one of the things that I talked about as I talked about how clients are using our platform these days is that they want to be able to run their businesses, run their IT anywhere, anytime. Anywhere had a lot to do with being able to do things with mobile devices, for example, being able to do things in the cloud. And in both of those cases, I'll talk briefly about things, but they really want also, many of our clients, to be up and running as much as they possibly can, the anytime thing. And so the 7.4 release has a new capability that helps us address what clients want when they want their operations to be available anytime. Now, the thing is that when we talk to our clients, well, pretty much everyone will say, I want my system and my applications to be up and running all the time, anytime. Really, when it comes right down to it, many of our clients don't have to have it every second of every day. And, of course, this is true in the industry itself. So there are a few ways of talking about what it means to be available anytime, or how close to anytime you have to you're able to tolerate in your shop. There's this RTO abbreviation, which stands for Recovery Time Objective. And in your particular situation, what you need to ask yourself is how long are you willing to accept that your application can't do its work? If you are okay with the idea that, say, you have a 5-minute outage on your application and your business is fine, that's still pretty close to any time, but it's not all the time, every second of every day. And your requirements for the kind of software and hardware you have will be different then. Another way to look at this is how much data are you willing to lose? How much time are you willing to let pass between the last good data that you're sure of and the next good data that's coming in? That's a recovery point objective. Now, these terms are not specific to us. These are terms used in the availability industry. And the point of bringing this up is so that as I use these terms to describe what DB2 Mirror is and what other things are, you'll understand that DB2 Mirror is about getting your RTO and RPO as close to zero as is humanly possible, whereas there are other things that have allowances for you to have a longer span between the amount of time, or between the time your application goes down and is back up again. All right. Many of our clients, particularly historically, have been fine with what they'd consider an active-inactive environment. In this case, they're running their system just fine. They have their data stored off somewhere, usually in checkpointed data. And if their primary system goes down, they are willing to take the time to bring it up on another system somewhere. And an inactive system, it's not being used by them or anybody, might be sitting on a business partner site, and restore that data and get running again. And again, many clients are fine with that. Your RTO is significantly greater than zero. In other words, you might have hours, maybe even days. In history, it was often the case that people were okay with having an outage that lasted a whole weekend. Very few clients are willing to do that anymore, but that certainly used to be the case. And so there were availability technologies that were built with this as the assumption that you would be willing to have your platform down for a certain period of time, might extend into hours or perhaps into days. And there's nothing wrong with that. If that's what your business wants, that's fine. There are plenty of options for how to do that. A more adopted technology state these days is something that's like active passive, where your data is being copied from your active partition to some partition that is running but is not allowed to do real work, so that if your primary partition goes down, now all of a sudden your secondary partition or your secondary machine can become active relatively quickly. Our PowerHA PowerHA product, for example, is very much like this. The data is being copied all the time, but you actually do have a brief outage when you're switching from your primary to your secondary, and you have an outage, short, but it's still an outage if your primary system goes down unexpectedly and you have to recover from that. Again, many technologies exist in our marketplace to be able to deal with this if that's what you're okay with. Here you might be talking about minutes, maybe an hour, to move from one system to another, so your RTO is greater than 0. It's still pretty small compared to weekend upgrades and so on, but it's still pretty small, but it's not 0. Over the course of the last 5 to 8 years, many of our large clients, particularly those in financial industry, so banking and insurance, and in healthcare, have been demanding that we find a way to do what they consider an active-active scenario, where you have two systems up and running at the same time, where applications on either one of those systems can operate on the same data. And if one of the systems goes down, it doesn't matter because all of the applications can continue running on the other system while you take care of whatever made the system that went down go down and bring it back up again. That's what people call active-active. So two systems, essentially, could be two partitions on the same box, but usually two systems that are actively running against the same data at the same time. In other words, we have a continuous availability environment. You don't ever need to go down. Okay, so those are the environments. Now, how are we addressing that? Well, this table will be in your PDF, and you're welcome to have it, but it just says what I said before. Let's talk about the specific thing that becomes IBM DB2 Mirror for I. This is a separate product that you buy on top of and next to the 7.4 release, but it is enabled by a number of the internals that we updated in 7.4 that allow us to do operating system synchronous replication, and it gives you the ability to have continuous availability. I'll show you a sort of a scenario in a chart or two to help you understand what I mean by continuous availability and what it means to be synchronously replicated. But the point here is to be able to have fully 24/7 uptime for your applications. It will also then allow you to do something which many of our clients have been asking for, even if they don't want 24/7 uptime, which is to allow you to do a rolling upgrade. A rolling upgrade would be, for example, if you have 7.4 installed on both of these machines and you want to install the first technology refresh, which will come out this fall. You could have both systems up and running against the same data. You could then pull one system out of the replication, update to the technology refresh one, start it up again, it would go back in sync, and you would then be able to take the other system down and put its technology refresh on. You never lost access to your applications or your data, even though you were upgrading both systems, because everything was synchronized by this DB2 Mirror stuff. This allows you to get RTO and RPO as close to 0 as you possibly can. There's always the case that you could potentially lose power to both of these things at the same time, but generally speaking, you can get RTO and RPO as close to 0 as possible, and it is a separate product that you pay for. So, schematically, how does this work? Here on this picture, you have two separate nodes. I think of them as two different machines. They could be two partitions on the same machine, but two separate machines is the way I think of this. And you have applications running on each side, which conceptually to the application are using one database. That database happens to be shared across these two systems. When an application on node 1 does an update to a record or an add record to the database, when that happens, it gets written to a mirrored copy of the database on the other side. And it does not complete until both systems' databases have exactly the same information. To do that, it runs across this thing that's in the middle, which is RoCE, RDMA over Converged Ethernet. It's a super fast, high throughput connection protocol that allows us to have extremely low latency between the two systems. And so this synchronous operation, which if you were just doing it on one system, only has to worry about one system's applications being able to use this database, is now spreading it across the two databases, but it appears to be one database to the application above it. And so by the time the operation completes, an application on node 2 could do a query and find that Fred, age 24, is now in the database. A lot of people ask after a presentation like this, so let me just anticipate the question. Wait, how does this work if both of them are trying to do something to the same record at the same time? Well, in fact, the design for this to avoid conflicts has been there for years and years and years. It's essentially the same because the applications have no idea that there are two databases involved, as having two applications on the same node do something to the database. There's always been a need for locking. We have been able to synchronize locking now across two systems so that it doesn't appear to be any different. It doesn't appear to the applications that they are competing for the database record with somebody on another system. It just looks like they're competing for the same thing on this system. And in fact, we've had something called the DB2 multi-system for a long time that has had this capability. So this is built on that architecture, but now has this capability of having the two databases synchronized via this RoCE adapter, which is super, super fast. Now, the RoCE adapter, by the way, is a local thing. You have to have these two partitions, these two systems, within about 100 meters of one another, 200 meters if you allow a switch in between them. So this is a solution to provide you a continuous uptime environment within a data center. If you want to pair this then with a disaster recovery site, you'll still use one of those other technologies for doing a disaster recovery replication. So this works with those other technologies, but this is meant to give an IT shop within the data center the ability to have always up and running as long as the center is up and running. Now, one of the keys behind this, and one of the reasons it's called DB2 Mirror, is that most of the data that's being used by applications is in fact database data. Now, as people around part of this platform for a long time know, there are a couple different ways to do data. There's the old style record level access, and then there's the set-based, the SQL-based, the fully relational database way of doing things. And you can mirror any kind of data that's in the database. It doesn't matter whether you're using the older style or the newer style. And this chart lists a lot of details I don't need to go through, but they're helpful for you if you are a database engineer and understand all of this stuff is getting mirrored when you start a DB2 Mirror session and say this database is going to be mirrored on both systems and usable on both systems at the same time. But while the vast majority of what is needed by the application is data running in a database, it's not only data running in a database. There are a whole bunch of other objects that also have to be mirrored so that the environments on both sides can be unaware of the fact that they are on two separate systems. And so user profiles and the authority that you have to objects, in particular database objects, has to be mirrored. And that's all part of the DB2 Mirror product support, and again, the underlying 7.4 release that enables the DB2 Mirror processing to happen. So There are many, many more details than this. There are certainly things that aren't these objects and aren't database objects. All those details are on the DB2 Mirror stuff. But let's talk conceptually again about how this gets you to active-active. All right, so there are a couple different styles of running applications on our platform, and the historical applications are tied to essentially users on green screens. Even if you're using a web interface, most of the applications that are on our platform these days started out as green screen applications, and so you have people running something on Node 1. Those applications are unaware that there are two nodes actually supporting this same set of data. But now with DB2 Mirror in place, if Node 1 happens to go down, you can just migrate those users to Node 2 and have them start up their application again. All the people who are running applications on Node 2 have no idea anything happened. Node 2 goes into a tracking state where every change that it makes, it's keeping track of, so that when Node 1 comes back up, we can make those changes to the database and the other objects on Node 1 and then get things going again. But meanwhile, you can start those jobs up again and running on Node 2, and the data won't have been lost, right? Whatever the applications were doing will be there, and anything that happened on Node 2 on those applications will be there. There is a little bit of downtime here, and this is one of the reasons why we talk about RTO being close to zero. If you're using this style of application, this application does need to be restarted. There is a short period of time where you have to say, okay, start it now, pointing that at Node 2 instead of Node 1. And because there are so many of our applications that are still based on this sort of application paradigm, there will be some outage. However, for 2 decades, we've been advising people to modernize their applications so that they are not tied to a specific green screen device, a specific device description, but instead access our data and do their applications via web interfaces. If you are doing that already, if your application is doing that already, then you're already enabled for the ability to have things like load balancers, where if your web application wants to, it can say, get the data that I'm asking for from either of this pair, and it doesn't matter to me as an application where you get it from, because as long as I get the data, I'm fine. Well, if you have an environment like that, then Node 1 can go down, and your web clients never know that they changed the source of their data. If they were getting it from Node 1, now they're just getting it from Node 2. It's part of the configuration, and there is zero downtime in this instance. Many of our most modern clients have been moving this direction for a long time, and they are the ones who are likely to jump on this quickly. Now, we've also seen a number of our clients, even before this came out, because we had a large set of clients who are working with us in alpha and beta and in fact, advisory councils before that, who said, this is cool, but what I'd really like to use it for first is to be able to do my queries and reports on one system, but I want to know that it's exactly the data that is being used by my production environment. And so they are looking for this active and less active environment where, yes, every time you make an update on either side, it happens to both sides, but they're not going to let Node 2 do any updates. They just want to run queries and reports. And you can absolutely do that with this environment. In fact, there are many, many user scenarios, but unless you have an entire presentation on that, it's probably not worth our time to go through them all. Now, one thing that people often ask is what it's built on top of. They are used to things like logical replication that are built on top of remote journaling. That remote journaling can still exist in this environment, but we did not build DB2 Mirror based on that. There's physical replication, independent ASPs and so on that you used to need to have and still need to have for PowerHA, but those, again, are technologies you can use in conjunction with this, but you do not have to. It is operating system level synchronization. So we are synchronizing the objects and the database records between the operating systems without using any of these technologies. There's a whole lot of information about this. Again, in the PDF, you'll have the major link. So this is the single biggest thing that we did in 7.4 was enabling this DB2 Mirror product because a large set of our customers, particularly our largest customers, have been hoping for and working with us on it. So I've done that as much as I'm going to do now. Now we're going to get to the rest of the 7.4 stuff. Because we have over an hour this time, I spent a little longer on that, hopefully answering a few questions. But if you have more questions and you submit them, I will probably send those questions off to my database and DB2 Mirror experts. Now let's move on to some of the other key things that are part of cornerstones of the 7.4 release. There are three relatively big things that happen. There are always a bunch of little things, but there are three relatively big things. One is authority collection by objects. Then we'll talk about the TLS updates and SMB3. In 7.3, the release before this, we added a new feature to the operating system that allows you to do authority collection by user profile. The idea here is that clients need to be able to prove to themselves or to auditors that any given user can only do what they should be allowed to do by their policies. So, for example, somebody who's running a report for HR might need to be able to access the data to run the report, but shouldn't be able to get into the HR data and see everything that is in the HR record, and only a few people should be able to update it. How do you prove that? Well, in 7.3, you had this ability to say, okay, for this user profile, as they are doing their job, I'm going to trace and I'm going to see every object that they touch, what authority they had to the object, and what authority they needed to have in order to do their job. If you found that a user had more authority than they needed to, you could reduce that authority. They would still be able to do their job, and you've closed an exposure. For example, an operator who, for some reason, had update authority to a record, you could remove that, and because their job only required them to have use operation, they would be able to keep doing their work. That was a great feature. A lot of clients are using that, but they also said, in some environments, what I need to do is to know who has access to particular objects on my system, because what I'm really securing is those objects. And that's what 7.4 allows. It allows you to do authority collection by object so that you can get for anybody, any user profile who touches an object, track the fact that they touched it, show what authority they had to the object with the operation they were doing, and what authority they needed to have to be able to do that. This, again, allows you to reduce excess authorization, but now you're looking at it from a different point of view. Instead of going at it from user to user, you're looking at it from object to object, or more likely, set of objects to set of objects. You can say, this database itself, or this library with these things in it, I want to be able to lock those down, and to do that, I want to be able to collect by object who's got access and what access they should have. So as of 7.4, you can do that. You can say specific objects or kinds of objects. Using the change authority collection command, you can now say either I want it done by user or I want it done by this object or set of objects. So what you need to do now is something basically as simple as what you did before. Before you would say, I'm going to start authority collection for a user. Here instead you can say, I'm going to point to specific objects and say, I want these in or out of the collection. Then I start that collection, and everything that goes on that ever touches that object in any way gets tracked, gets traced, it gets kept aside, and then you can examine the results later. You can end the authority collection for a specific user or all the objects that you're currently collecting, and you will get data such as I'll show you on the next couple of screens. You can configure it easily using CL commands, or these days we recommend people using Navigator to do that so they have a nice graphical user interface way of doing it. And you get object detail for all of those objects that you have requested authority collection. So what will you get when you're done? Well, there are a couple different ways to look at this. One is to do an SQL query against the data that we have stored out, and you will get all sorts of information that Scott touched this object in this way, Frank DBA touched it in that way, and so on. Okay, that's one way you can look at it, or you can look at it using our management tools, a nice graphical user interface, but it's the same information. And basically what it shows you is what's the required authority to be able to do whatever it was that Scott was doing. And you can see that at some points on the right-hand side, Scott only needed read authority, but at some points he needed object operations authority in order to be able to do the operations he was doing. And so you can tell which is the highest level of authority he ever needed to do things, and you could then trim things down if he didn't need to have all the authority that he had. Same sort of thing with Frank DBA or anybody on your system. You'll be able to see every authority that they have. And using the graphical interface, you can even choose which data you want to examine. We collect lots and lots of data on the SQL version of this. While I only have the current and required authority, they could have pulled out lots more data, exact timestamps and so on, exact programs you were using, where the libraries were, and so on. Either way, whether you're doing it through SQL or the graphical interface, you can get that information. All right, so that's object collection, or authority collection by object. The next big thing that's taking place in security as of 7.4 is our modernization of encryption technology. Don't know how much you all have been involved in security and encryption, but those of you, everybody has used encryption when you're dealing, for example, with websites that you're doing business with on the internet. In the old days, there was SSL. That's what people still think of. It's the terminology people use. But anyway, the protocol was called SSL. And what it allowed us to do is to have communication between two systems, two servers or your laptop and some commercial site somewhere, where the data that was sent between would be encrypted as it was traveling the network. The problem with SSL was that as technology improved, SSL was too easy to break. You could get a bunch of encrypted data that you had somehow listened to on the network, and you would be very quickly able, these days with technology that we have, to break that down into its unencrypted form, thus capturing any information like credit card information and so on. And so the industry created this new protocol, TLS, with different encryption capabilities, and over the course of the last couple of decades, TLS has undergone a couple of enhancements, a couple of evolutionary changes that make it essentially impossible with today's technology to be able to break the encryption. I'm sure over time, as this stuff happens, it will have to evolve again, but the most recent version of TLS, the most protected version of TLS, is 1.3. And so 7.4 now has the ability to do TLS 1.3, exactly the most powerful and most secure version of encrypted traffic that you would expect from any platform. We also sort of by default remove the capability of doing some of these older SSL versions so that you are not exposed to people who are trying to attack you by using old technology and then you just allowing them to do that because you forgot. So there are a great many enhancements here that are built into the 7.4 release. We are PTFing the 1.3 support back into 7.3 as well. For those of our clients who have already been using our open source technology, by the way, TLS 1.3 has been available for applications to use for a couple of years now. TLS 1.3 has been available as an open source package that you could, if you wanted to, put onto your application. But our base operating system needed to have it as an operation that anybody could use even if you weren't using open source code, and so that's part of what 7.4 had in it. Another security enhancement also happens to be a performance enhancement, relates to doing file sharing using the SMB protocol. SMB protocol is thought of as a file sharing protocol because so many of our clients have a SQL server, so Windows environments in their networks, and they want to do file sharing. Most of the time, our clients want that also to be protected via the most recent security protocols, and SMB3 is not only an enhancement to making things go faster, which it certainly does, but it also increases security. So that was another major enhancement that was put out in 7.4 related to security. As I mentioned before, our platform is used most because of the applications that can be run on top of it, and so application development is always a key cornerstone of any given release. Many of the things I'm about to mention, however, while they were announced with 7.4, are also available on 7.3 because our strategy is to be able to give that to our application development community as quickly as possible. And it's only rarely that an application development option actually needs to be tied to something that's in the major release. So there were application development enhancements to our traditional languages. Our traditional languages, the things that started with this platform, are RPG, which is now RPG-4, and COBOL. RPG has been getting new enhancements every 6 months now for, I don't know, 8 years, something like that. And these two things that are mentioned here aren't the only things, but they are things that got the most votes by RPG users out there in the world. Varying dimensions arrays, same position subfields are things you can do in other modern languages. We want to make sure that RPG, you can do the same kinds of things. It may not be as cool as mobile interfaces, but they are, in fact, necessary to be able to do the kind of computing that people want to do in RPG today. For COBOL, we've been sort of stagnant on COBOL for quite a while because the COBOL standards bodies haven't settled on a bunch of new enhancements, but they did in time for us to implement a raft of new things for COBOL. So if you're a COBOL user, definitely go to our Knowledge Center article on what was enhanced in the COBOL space. But we've been doing more and more with open environments because so much of the new coding that's going on, particularly as people modernize into microservices and modernize into mobile and cloud, has been in open source languages space. So Node.js version 10 is the latest long-term support release that Node has available. IBM is a strong contributor to the open source Node project. In fact, I'm pretty sure we still have an IBMer who is the lead of that open source project across the industry. And we're expecting the version 12 to be available. In fact, this is a chart that I used back in April. It wouldn't surprise me if the open source team is just about to do version 12. We'll see where things are. We've gotten a number of new languages onto this platform in the last 6 or 7 years from the open source space. The pace of new languages has slowed down as we've gotten the key ones on there. But in the 7.4 release, we were able to announce a new programming language for IBM I, which is called R. You don't have to know what it is, but if you do, I'll bet you're happy that it's on the platform. Gartner was super happy to hear. When they heard that we put R on IBM I, they said that means IBM is serious about keeping IBM I as a data analysis platform, because to them that's what it meant. For our client base, what it's important to understand is that it's a very powerful programming language for doing analytics and statistical computing. And because we are a platform that's built on our data, there's no particular reason why you should have to take data off to run an R language program on some other platform when you could just be doing it on IBM I. What do I mean by it being a powerful language? Well, you can do analytics on IBM I today using RPG, for example, or PHP, and that's fine. You can do that. But it may take you 50 or 100 instructions, lines of code, to do some things that are simple in like 5 or 6 lines of R, because R is all about doing powerful data manipulation operations with just a few instructions. And so this is something that is important for folks who are doing data science and data analytics and data mining on our platform. There will be more and more of those as the years go by, as more people start doing analytics natively on IBM I. So it's great to have this as one of the tools our clients can use. Speaking of tools, we started with languages, but the open environment and the traditional environment are based on the kind of tooling that you can use to make your work environment as efficient as possible. We have been pushing people for years and years and years to use the tool which has been called Rational Developer for I for a long time. It had lots and lots of old names from back in the WebSphere days and so on, but it's an interface that allows you, as those of you who are using it know, to be able to not only code your code on your screen, but also see where all the pieces are, to be able to do debug at the same time. It all makes perfect sense. And yet, we've had many, many people who've used this old thing called PDM, and they feel they are so good at doing things in PDM that they don't want to move to this new graphical interface, even though they would have access to their debug windows and their object windows and so on. So we put PDM, a view of PDM, into Rational Developer for I. So you have an easy transition. If you're a PDM user and you love PDM, you can have your window of PDM there and you can use it. And then you'll start seeing that there are these other things that you can use to improve your productivity. And then hopefully that will get you to see that it's even easier than PDM to do it in the standard RDI area. So that's one of the cool things. There are a bunch of other things there, improved SQL formatting and so on, all part of the latest tools for RDI. A really big change that has happened in IBM I, which you need to know about if you're moving to 7.4, is that our delivery mechanism for open source on IBM I used to be this thing, this option called 5733 OPS. When we first started doing open source delivery on the platform, we did not have the standard ways of doing updates for packages and distribution of packages that are in the industry, and our client base was very used to doing things via PTFs and products and options. And so we initially gave you open source via this thing that's OPS, this option, and then we would provide PTFs when we bundled up a bunch of new stuff in the open source arena that we wanted to give to you. That's gone. It's no longer needed. You don't have to have that. In fact, we aren't updating that anymore at all, period, because over the last several years, particularly the last 24 months, now you can get anything you need in the open source arena using the same tools that everybody else in the open source community uses, RPN for managing packagers, and then Yum for being able to control the updates to that. There's an easy way to do that. There's a link down at the bottom of that page. But to make it even easier for our clients who are so used to managing things using our tool set, we have an open source package manager that's part of Access Client Solutions that can show you, here are the open source packages that are on my platform, and here is a button where I can use it to update it to the most current version, or I can keep it from updating if that's what I want to do. So in any case, you can use Open Source Package Manager as of the 7.4 timeframe. Again, this goes back to 7.3. These are all things that can run against either of those releases. Another thing that has come that's sort of a tool, it's sort of middleware into the open source arena for IBM I, is this thing called ActiveMQ. Now, for those of you who are out there using IBM's MQ, this is a similar thing in concept, right? There is this need in middleware to be able to provide a message broker, being able to send a message from one entity, usually a program, to another entity, usually a program. And so message delivery, message brokering, is a standard concept which MQ from IBM implements. But in the industry, if you weren't using IBM's MQ, what were you using? Well, they created this ActiveMQ. It's sort of the message broker technology that won in the open source environment. There are lots of different ones, but this is the one that people tend to use most. And so that is now available on IBM I, which is key because bringing over packages onto IBM I and bringing over languages onto IBM I that need message brokers as their middleware, they pretty much presume that you're going to have ActiveMQ from the Apache project available on the platform. And so now we do. So you can have both of them running at the same time, MQ and ActiveMQ if you want, or you can live on one or another. But in any case, applications are made assuming ActiveMQ is there. We've got the most recent things from Python, and again, this is related to data. Python is a language that is used by many people who are coming out of school these days, and one of its sets of libraries and frameworks that are very popular in Python are being able to do data manipulation, scientific analysis of data, and so on. So that's now part of what's available on IBM I. We have well over 300 packages of open source, whether it's languages or tools, available on IBMI these days. We can't tell you all of them, but some of the key things that people have been waiting for are things that we mentioned in this presentation. We also, as in our tool set, created an ODBC driver on IBMI. Now, ODBC used to be used on other platforms, think laptops, that wanted to talk to our database. And so those drivers would exist on those other platforms to be able to talk into DB2. But we put it on IBMI so that you could now develop applications on Windows and Linux using ODBC, but those applications would be intended to be server applications, and you could just deploy them onto IBMI, and because we now have ODBC, you can do that. This also allows ODBC libraries from the various languages to be used directly on IBMI. There's no reason not to do it anymore, so that's part of it. We contribute to JT Open, which is the open source thin Java that's out there in the world today. And now you can, if you build on top of a JT Open, which many of our clients do, you can have a connection not be lost if there's a backup application. So you can pair this now with the stuff I talked about with DB2 Mirror. Your application using the newest JDBC can say, I want my data to come from System A or System B, it doesn't matter to me. And so if connection gets lost to System A, they can go directly to B. And this is one of the ways that you can get that RTO of 0 if your applications are Java-based applications or applications that are using Java connections to the database. Another cool thing that has happened in the open source community is the support of what people are calling microservices. About 3 or 4 years ago, people called this the API economy. It doesn't matter. The point is, in order to do services-based operations in any server talking to any server, you need to have a way to have APIs that you can call. You can call them via web services, but you got to be able to have APIs sitting in there somewhere. And these days, what people found was that you wanted ways to get at the data that's in your database, and you were having to create API after API after API for all the various ways and groups of things that you might want to get from your database. Well, there's this thing in Node which is called Loopback. It doesn't mean what it sounds like. It means, at least if you come from a networking background like I do. But what does it mean? It means that you can give your database table definition to this Loopback support. And Loopback will automatically create you APIs to be able to get stuff from that data in lots and lots of different ways. It'll create those APIs, and then you can just call them from any kind of program, and you'll be able to expose the data from your database using REST APIs that you didn't have to go to the trouble of coding. It would just code them for you. It's sort of like a fourth-generation language, but really it's just a way to templatize how do I expose data that's in my database in an API way. Another open-related thing is how you connect and get at various resources on IBMI. Now, before 7.4, people, if they wanted to call into services that are implemented by RPG, COBOL, Java, C, C++, they would all go through the IWS server. You establish a REST connection, and IWS would figure it out. But if you wanted to get at the database, you had to not connect with REST, you had to connect with JDBC and ODBC, and then that stuff would go directly to the DB2 server jobs, which would then go to DB2. As you're writing services these days, you'd like to be able to write them sort of one way, and so that's what 7.4 allows you to do. You can establish a REST connection with IBMI, which will establish the REST connection to IWS, and then you can send any kind of request. Is it a request to be able to be serviced by a program or to be able to get data out of the database? It essentially looks like it's a service anyway, so let's just have that go to the server job, the DB2 server job, and you don't have to use the other techniques. So again, lots of ways to do lots of different things. We try to give people options. This is a useful option for many people. Also, we created a wizard to help you deploy new services on your platform. So you can create a brand new REST service, and that, for example, could be an SQL request, or it can be a request off to a program. It's all updated in this IWS wizard. Initially, the IWS wizard was only targeting those programs that were out there providing services. Now you can use SQL as well, so that's part of what it does. In DB2 itself, every 6 months we have brand new things that we deliver to you, and so they are being delivered as part of 7.4, of course. We have been giving you new services, these SQL services from the database team for several years now, about 6 years. And what these web services, these SQL services are meant to do is to make it easier for people to get information from the system using SQL, querying a system essentially for information instead of forcing them to go through APIs or instead of forcing them to run commands and then somehow scrape out of the result of that command the information that they want. So we've delivered a number of new things over the course of the last 7 years, 6 years. The ones that were announced here are listed in bold on the right-hand side, and I'll talk about a couple of them. You can query spooled files using SQL to get information from a spooled file so that you don't have to, as I said, sort of scrape through it and find it yourself. So you can get information from a spooled file just by issuing an SQL command. And you don't have to do it on the same system the query or the spool file is. If you can direct to the spooled file, you can get the information from somewhere else. There's the data, or there's the code for those of you who want to use it. We gave you the ability to build a list of values, aggregate a bunch of them together. Now, if you have a list of values and want to split those up, you can do that using split, and you can find out the firmware currency level of the platform that you're on using an SQL service as well. There's also a way to get information from data areas using SQL select statements. So we just continue to add more and more of these things, and this is another area where it's critical that we hear from our clients on what they need next. We're essentially replacing APIs. The APIs are still there, but we're essentially replacing the need for APIs for clients who just want to use SQL from the same system or other systems to get data. And so we prioritize based on what we hear our clients needing. Message file data and so on. Here is a page that shows you, a couple of pages that show you the different kinds of things that are exposed via SQL services. Again, that's in your PDF, but I'm going to talk about another way that you can get at it in a moment. Access Client Solutions is a strategic interface for accessing and managing the platform. We no longer have a client-based tool that attaches to us. It's all based on Access Client Solution, which sits on top of Java, which can sit basically anywhere, including Windows and Mac and phones and so on. Every 6 months or even less, we put out new function on Access Client Solutions as well. Some of the new stuff that's in there is syntax validation for things that you're doing on the platform. But another really great enhancement is these SQL services that I mentioned before. We have examples in ACS, running examples that will show you how to do any one of these things to get information. Information about a spool file, as I mentioned before, or information from a work active job, or whatever. Anything that the services can do, there's an example here, a working example, and you can just copy it and run it, and it'll run. Or you can copy it and change it to look at something specific that you want to look at. But we give you those working examples in ACS. It's one of the best ways to consume these new capabilities. One of the new enhancements that's in Access Client Solutions is the ability to filter in and bring in only the files in IFS that you want. Many of our clients, when they first started using Access Client Solutions so long ago, found the performance to be bad. And in some cases it was bad because old technology was used initially to do ACS. We have totally revamped what ACS runs on. It's much faster now. But sometimes it's because when they wanted to do ACS, what they wanted to use it for was to look at the files that are stored in IFS, and that set of files was so big that it took a long time to bring it all in before ACS could show it to you. Now you can filter down and include or exclude things so that you can get a very fast response time if you know that you're only going to be looking at certain data on the platform. So it's not really a performance improvement, it's an ability for you to make the performance as good as you need it to be for the subset that you want. If you're only going to look at 17 objects in one directory, why pull in everything out of IFS? That makes sense, and so Access Client Solutions allows you to do that. You can get that updated several times a year, even though we do announcements only twice a year. They're usually updating it, probably 5 or 6 times a year, and you can get that always from their download site. A product that sits on top of IBM I is Web Query. This is something that you might have to pay for, but you might already have the ability to have it for free because it's the replacement for an old green screen product for doing reports. Well, one of the things that Web Query does for you is allow you to visualize the data that's in your database, and that's what it's primarily intended to do. Now, when you put it on your platform and look at your data, you have to know something about how your data is put together in order to create these visualizations. And so there's a tutorial on how to do that. That's great. But another thing that you can do on the platform is to use Web Query's built-in capabilities to look at what's going on your system, because we store all of the information about what's going on your system in databases anyway. And so DB2 Web Query can, from the start, know exactly what's on the data or what's on the machine for system data, and they give you the ability to look at things like things that systems administrators might want to have, like, for example, a red, yellow, green about is this particular product that's installed on my system up to date according to the latest PTFs and so on. So that's an enhancement that they've made, making it easier for customers to gain immediate value from it and then use that as examples on how to look at data that's actually running their business, not just their machines. So that's one of the cool things that came out in this time frame. Now, of course, we are an integrated operating system. There are many, many things that get updated every single major release. I'm going to mention a couple of them before we finish this webcast. A couple of them that are related to how you manage work on the platform are in this section. In releases way long ago, I think 6.1, we introduced this thing called workload groups. The idea behind workload groups was that you might have work jobs that you wanted to limit how many cores they were running on. So for example, you might have had a 6-core machine. Somebody charged you for a piece of software based on the number of cores it was running on. You have a 6-core machine, and so they want to charge you for 6 cores worth of it. And you say, no. I know that this thing is never using any more than 2 cores. I want to pay the 2-core price. Well, there's this thing called workload groups that would allow you to define it to say this particular workload is going to run in a place, a subsystem, where you're only going to ever allow those things in that subsystem to use 2 cores. And because of that, then people would allow you to pay the 2-core price even though you're using 6 cores in the partition. And that's all well and good. But what we found was that people then were limited in how they were using this because you had to have them based on subsystems. And many people wanted them instead to be related to the jobs. The jobs, not the subsystem, describe the workload that's going on. And so in 7.4 now, you could configure based on the job. This is the workload that I'm running, and I want that to be tied to a particular workload group. Capping it at 2 cores, for example, is now not based on which subsystem it runs in, but which job it is running which workload. And this makes a lot more sense to those clients who've been using it for that reason. Now, you can use it for other reasons. You can use it to limit how many cores a particular user is using on the platform. If you have a particular user, for example, that you are having trouble because they run a query that takes over the system or something like that, you can do that. So it's not only about licensing, but that's how it was created in the first place. And again, now you can do it based on job description. It doesn't have to be specifically a subsystem that is limiting that particular person or workload or whatever. There is a significant increase in the amount of storage that people are attaching to IBMI, and that means that there are new storage technologies, some of which are better set up at larger LUN sizes. And so now you can have larger LUNs attached to IBMI as of 7.4. I'm pretty sure that these are only 7.4 and not TR'd back to 7.3, but I can't be absolutely sure, and that's what the DeveloperWorks website is all about. There's a link in this presentation to that. Sorry, I'm not immediately aware of that one. We did some compiler updates for CL to allow you to use IFS source files for CL programs and CLLE programs. Almost all of our clients who are doing new development want their source code to be stored in IFS, where it can be operated upon most easily by not only our rational tools, but by open source tools. And so they wanted to be able to include CL in that list of languages that can have programs stored in IFS. So that came about. We now allow 7.4 to go up to SMT 8, 192 cores in one partition. You have to get lab services help if you want to go that big, but there are a few of our clients, several of our clients that want to push past the 96 limit and the previously existing 64 limit and the previously existing 32 limit to have many, many, many cores running in one partition of IBMI, and so that's part of what 7.4 does. This is some of that same information about disk arms in addition to LUN size. It's important for clients to understand that if they're going to move to 7.4, they need to be on one of the most recent Power families, so Power 8 and Power 9. So if you want to be able to do DB2 Mirror, for example, you need 7.4, and 7.4 requires Power 8 and Power 9. It also requires that Rocky adapter that I talked about before. So just be aware that if you're going to try to take advantage of these new 7.4 capabilities, you need to be modern in the platform that you're running on top of. Now, another number of other things have been talked about in the last several months came out at about the same time as 7.4 was being talked about, so I thought I would mention them here as part of the presentation. We've got a lot of our clients who, even if they're not going to move to the cloud, want to be able to manage their IT infrastructure as a cloud. And so there's this thing called IBM Cloud Private that provides you a lot of technology to do that very stuff, whether you're running on Power 8 or Power 9. And you can do it all and include IBMI in this management of your internal cloud. There's a bunch of good information about how you get that. But you can also, these days, also create environments in the cloud, as in public clouds if you want to. Now, we've got lots and lots of business partners who've been creating clouds, and there's nothing wrong with what they're doing. But IBM and SkyTap are getting into the business now where they will give you IBMI in a cloud environment where you can use it for doing things like backup or development environments and so on. None of these are run by my IBM I development shop. We don't create what the offering is. All we do is create the underlying technology that allows you to do cloud. And in fact, you've been able to do it for several years. It's only finally this year that people who are offering public clouds are starting to do that. And in fact, about a month ago, Google announced that IBM had partnered with them to create a Power Google Cloud offering. I don't think it's generally available yet. I think you still have to contact the sales folks at Google IBM Cloud, and they'll help you get it. But we're on the cusp here, right? People are starting to do public cloud in addition to the clouds that have been offered by partners. So you ought to know that that's happening. We take advantage of that even before public cloud existed by offering cloud-based technologies. So you can use cloud storage solutions, for example, to back things up onto a cloud. It looks like you're backing them up to tape, but in fact what you're doing is backing them up to a cloud, and then you can do your recovery from there. Uses a couple of different products that are part of this whole family of things, but you save your cloud or save your data off to a cloud or FTP server, and you can get things back. There's lots more stuff than that in IBM I, as I mentioned before. I'll whip past a couple of things, and then, boy, we really need to finish because it's already 10 after the hour. Domino 10 is available for I now. It was made available in February. We talked about it again when we did our release, just to let people know that the Domino team continues to support I with the newest versions of what they got. There are also new enhancements in PowerHA, Apache, and all these other things. But again, we don't have time to do all of them. Here are some important links because you can get the PDF, and these links are important for finding things. The enhancement landing pages. There is, of course, the Knowledge Center where we essentially write the book which describes in technical details all of the different enhancements and all the different capabilities of the platform. But if you want to see in specific what came out in 7.3, TR6, and for each of those enhancements, what's it really about, or for 7.4, the Developer Works links that are there are the enhancements, are the places you can go to get those enhancements. And as I mentioned early in the presentation, we aren't doing enhancements anymore for 7.2. It's still under support, but you ought to take this as a hint that once we have 2 major releases under normal support, then the oldest release, the 3rd release back, 7.2 in this instance, is being stabilized and getting it ready for announcements related to its eventual withdrawal. So that's the 7.3 presentation. Again, I took a little longer than I normally would to try to describe some of the details. Hopefully you got some good information about this. If there are any questions right away, Joe, that you want me to try and answer, I can. Often I take detailed questions afterwards and send them to my team. I have a very large team who are very, very smart about things. So if you want to pull things back from me, you can.
Okay, so let's do this. There are a couple of I think, easier questions that showed up a little bit that we'll pop over, and then I'll pull the list for some of the more complex ones, and then we'll get back to those people. So you talked about the DB2 for Mirror thing. Let's talk a little bit about that one. It's just 2 nodes too. You can't do a 3-node Mirror. That's correct. It is a pairing of 2 nodes. That's right. Okay, and one of the questions was licensing on both nodes. If you're not doing an active and you're doing backup, can one be a CBU, or do they both have to be fully licensed? They both have to be fully licensed as the product exists today. There are several immediate requests that people have had. So the quick answer to the question is you have to be fully licensed on both sides because you can be active on both sides. And right now we have no way of enforcing if you're using one system as a passive environment. But that is one of the top 5 major requirements people have asked us for. Another one is, and I didn't mention this in the beginning, today you have to have a storage area network for your storage for this because we use flash copy to get you initially set up so that you can have a mirrored environment. We got a lot of our clients who don't use storage area networks. They want to use internal direct attach disks. So you cannot use that in today's environment, but it is one of the things that we get asked for most. We've also had people ask us if we could go longer than 100 or 200 meters. And we've said in order to do that, we'll probably have to invent some sort of encryption technology that allows us to go across a very high-speed, longer network. And while that may be on the roadmap, it's not right around the corner. So to sort of head off a few of those questions that might come up about DB2 Mirror, there are some limitations, but we know this is just the first release, and we're listening to clients on which things they want us to enhance first. All right. One about block size. What the question was, and I thought I was trying to figure out if I could answer this, but I really wasn't sure. Is can we now use a standard 512-byte block size? So the answer is yes, but there are more details behind it than that, and we have a page that describes this. If you just send it to me, I can get it to the person who has the link to the page on how it all works. Okay. I'm just pulling out some easy ones here. Can RPG also be compiled from IFS? Oh, yes. Yep. RPG can be compiled from IFS. Yep. Okay. And can you use DDM to pull in remote data when you're using R? I
don't know the answer to that question. I think you can, but I don't know for sure. I haven't asked that question of my open team. Sorry.
Okay. So that one you'll get, well, we'll get them in the list and we'll pull out the ones that we weren't able to answer to get back to those.
Yeah. Why don't we do that? I appreciate that you guys probably planned your day to have all the way to the bottom of the hour, but I should probably be leaving here pretty quick.
Yeah, and actually that's all of them anyway. So, Steve, thank you so much. It's been just a wealth of information, and I will gather the chat stuff and get them back to you. Really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Sure, happy to do it, Joe.
Good, and thanks everybody for joining. I'm still lining up the August webinar, and if you're on the distribution list, I will send out invites for that in the next week or so. If you're not on my distribution list and you'd like to be, send me an email. My email address is on the wiki, which I posted in the question pane here. So you can send me an email, and I'll get back to you. I'll put you on the distribution list, and you'll get an invite about once a month or so. So with that, it's a wrap for today. Thanks again, Steve, and everybody have a good start to your August.
Thanks.